everybody. Welcome to UK Connection Gem Radio, and this is your host, Avril Price, and I'm here in London with the very wonderful Christine Payne-Towler, who we've just been having this gorgeous conversation. We couldn't wait for you guys. We had to get started, and and we did. We've got off to a fabulous start. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you, Avril. I'm so happy to be here. It's the top of the day on my left coast of America. So you're coming to me with the sunshine and the beauty of the Pacific Northwest.
I love being able to speak to people in the
Thanks,
States.
or get
We
channeled
do
through me.
have a lot of people that listen in from the States. So hi to all my American friends, our American listeners. You're very welcome. But also to Canada. We have people in China. Hi to Europe. I hope you're all having a great Monday and you're going to kick off your shoes, relax, and spend the next hour with us in conversation, because I'm so happy to be chatting with you, Christine, because you're known in the community as the goddess of tarot. And if anyone went to your website, Tarot University, they would see why.
Well, thank you.
Do you know, you made a wonderful comment quite recently, actually. It was after a blog I'd written about how I came to be with tarot. And you said, some people find Jesus, but I found tarot. And that really stuck with me. I thought, that's great. So do you think that there was a point in the development of esoteric culture in modern times where people actually did start to replace traditional Christian thinking with esoteric tarot as an example of that?
Well, you know, I grew up in the Berkeley Bay area and I graduated high school in 1970, and I could see it going on all around me. There was a powerful transformation of consciousness, and it wasn't just the psychedelic drugs, although, you know, unbeknownst to me, I was surrounded by roiling chaos at a psychic level. But there was this great search into world esotericisms. There was a desire to know all about the mysteries, north, south, east, west. And of course, California is very strongly impacted by South American, Central American, I guess, Mesoamerican culture. And so a lot of Mayan symbolism, a lot of Native American tradition, just right under our feet still throbbing. So I really felt like there was something powerful going on, and, you know, different people will say different things about the astrology of the times, but I never came down from that. I think I kind of myself got blown open during that period, not quite so colorfully as some, but in a way that marked me forever, that there would be a need to look at things as energy simultaneously as we look at things as form. So the realization that there's more than one reality going on at the same time, and one has to learn to have a foot in each world in order to move into the power of this time.
I think that was one of the things that I recognized from an early age about my embodiment as a sensitive, is that I realized that there was more to this world than the two-dimensional that we were encouraged to perceive it as, and that we were very much alive in all these different realms at once.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it was kind of easier when I was younger. It was very fluid. I think as I've got older and the need to rationalize about it, it's become more of a challenge. So, you have kind of structured your thoughts and your language around it so well. I mean, you know, but as I've gone through your blogs, there's some amazing stuff there. Some lovely conversations for you know, about how all these different aspects synthesized together. What I wanted to understand, Christine, what is Continental Tarot?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you for asking. Tarot, as I talk about it, has three major periods. The first one, 400 or 500 years long, represents the initial appearance of Tarot in the late 1400s, its development as a catalog of esoteric ideas. Once the Trumps got their numbers and began to carry the alphabet letters and other kinds of implications, it became a catalog, like a cabinet of metaphysical ideas as it came forward, and different groups got a hold of it and added to it. So that first 400 or 500 years was the stage when the old woodblock prints and the private issue handmade decks were filled out across Europe. Then there's what I consider to be a Masonic period, which is marked by this idea of the Egyptian tarot that takes first form in the late 1700s with the Atella decks, but it extends all the way to the 20th century, including Levi, Pappas, Paul Christian, the Tarot Bellin, and all the way out to Oswald Wirth. But C.C. Zane, the Falconier Tarot, there's a whole group of them. All of them actually started with some Masonic essays by de Gébelin and de Millay, a couple of fellows who wrote some essays that circulated in France, I guess the late 1700s, and this is what Atella was reacting off of or making hay on. So there was a big transition amongst the Masons. The Royalist lodges of the 15, 16, early 1700s had to fold in the face of the revolutions in Europe, and especially the successful revolution in France. And so they realized they were going to have to restructure. So they closed up all of these old boy societies from the royal families, and they reopened Masonry as a people's movement and open to the common man, smaller groups, and speaking a less elevated tone and bringing things a little closer to the practical world. So this is what Atella was taking off with, and his packs got into the divinatory world and really revolutionized the use of the tarot because they were more pictographic, or they, you know, the fresh sensation. Everybody's excited by the newest thing. So for almost 100 years, those were the main packs created. But by the end of the 1800s, now you have, the Masons have begun to build up a pretty strong edifice in the literature about tarot, and it's spilling over very strongly. And Pappas and Levi and some of these other groups, and including at the end of the 1800s, the beginnings of the Order of the Golden Dawn are stirring. So this, at the turn of the 20th century, we see ourselves tipping away from this so-called Egyptian model, which I now am calling the Masonic period. And now we're into the dominance of the English schools, which, you know, came through Waite and Paul Foster Case and Leicester Crowley and others who have taken a hold of that model. So you have one model that held for 400, 500 years without changing. Then you have some modifications sneaking in during the Masonic period. Then you have a blast of transformation happening in the 20th century. So here we are in the 21st century, looking back at it now. I'm just trying to calibrate my periscope so that I can see these different layers and differentiate them, because I think Tarot is not just one thing, right? It's architectonic and it's architectural things. It's like Legos. You can build many, many different things. You can build out in the direction of astrology. You can build out in the direction of Kabbalah. You can build out in the direction of Hermetic number theory. You can build out in the direction of yogic self-cultivation. You can, and that's just before you even get to the 20th century, where it's become the advisor to the stars and the perfect medium for, one-time counseling. The tarot readers of the world are now the, therapists of last resort everywhere. It's amazing to have seen from the time that I started in the 70s until now. The phenomenon that is tarot has ripped around the world faster than I would have ever thought, and I'm sure the internet is a part of it. And of course, I did my part with that because I did the writing for the text, the tarot interpretation text at the site tarot.com, which has been running now for 15 years and became an opening for a lot of people to realize you could, a person could develop a body of meanings and organize them correctly and actually present them as an automated delivery system. It was a great risk to do in 1999, but now everybody does it, and it's been a wonderful way to teach the world about tarot.
And thank you very much for the part that you played in that, because I, for one, absolutely adore tarot. I think it's such a it's become a way of life for me, and so listening to your conversation, in fact, then we can say that tarot has become a modern day institution, similar to that we could find in the Hierophant, perhaps.
Oh yes, oh yeah, indeed. That is what the Hierophant is talking about. Tarot is the flashcards of the ancient priestly class, because the original priesthoods they came up during the time of the pyramid building and the ziggurat building and the henge building, at the period when the Masons first got going and had learned how to create giant structures that could be used as observatories for scientists to do astronomical calculations with. So astrology is the inheritance, including all the math and the terminology and the notations and the schematic and all the laws of rhythm and motion that have then since been distilled out into things like alchemy and Kabbalah and Hermetic theory. This all is a gift from the ancient priesthoods, and at different times in human history it's been used different ways. I mean, it has positive applications and negative applications depending upon whose hands it falls into. But this is a map of the pulse of the solar system we live in and the harmonic relations between all of its operative parts. And so what I realized studying the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the magical methods that were developing in Europe was that after the Crusades, when Holy Land culture began coming back with the Crusaders, we learned a huge amount that had been forgotten in Western Europe, that had been retained in Arabic culture. They had a lot of science and a lot of the esoteric arts at a very high level of development. So that's what broke the not so dark ages, but that's what brought forth the Renaissance. So go ahead.
No, I'm listening, Christine. This is so interesting.
Yeah, so with the Arabic and Hebrew learning coming into Europe from North Africa, which means therefore through Spain and through Italy, but also on the eastern, coming in through the Silk Road from farther east. So we had multiple exposures of Europe to cultures all the way as far as the Hindu culture, and tea from China. So they got exposed to Taoism, they got exposed to Confucianism, they got exposed to Ayurveda, they got exposed to uh, what's that? The Hindu style of astrology, Vedic astrology.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And so all these things, the yogis, all the healers came, the herbalists, all kinds of things flooded into Europe, and we became slowly but steadily more and more literate, more and more numerate, more and more awake to a larger world, but also more and more inundated by the old world spooks, or the ancient world spooks and demons and angels and all the beliefs that came with the Abrahamic tradition. So the Christianity that had made it into Europe before was much more colored by the Greek and Latin tradition. It had been filtered through those languages, but after the Crusades, man, the unfiltered thing starts coming back to Western culture, and you find the royals and the nobles getting very interested in these higher sciences and in the magic and the operative capabilities that came with these new intellectual categories. So we got the rest of our literature back, or at least what had survived in Arabic culture, but we also had Christian metaphysicians and theologians and theorists taking a hold of what had come into Europe and mining it for things that would be useful for their own spiritual quest. So you had Catholics taking what they thought was interesting and making it over in their image. We had the Protestant transformation in Northern Europe causing a whole different response to the Abrahamic tradition because of them being anti-Catholic while being pro-Old Testament. You know, you have all these different factions and flavors that spread out, and each different group looks at the magic with a slightly different eye. So it's amazing that this deck of cards that came with the Islamic culture into the West, it's called the Mamluk pack, which was just the playing cards. 3 royals per suit and 1 through 10. 4 suits, that's the game. When that came into Europe, boom, suddenly queens appear, and so within just maybe 40 years, there's trumps. There's a set of 22 trumps. And, you know, who did this? We don't know, but suddenly we have the Tarot pack with no instruction manual and nobody to stand up and testify for it, but somehow everybody's playing it. And in that first century, it didn't have the numbers on the trumps. So it was a memory game. It was an art of memory tool, and you had to already have memorized what order they were in. And there's several different games played in different regions where the different orders apply. But the trump order that came down to history to us is what we call the Marseille order. So the characteristic of this first 4 or 5 centuries of Tarot is basically, to the largest degree, dominated by Marseille decks that have the numeration. The Magus is the 1, boom, 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 and the Fool is at the end, given the 0. And you know, these numbers that are on their faces link up directly with the Hebrew alphabet, because the alphabet is a set of numbers. So these can't be taken apart. This is on the face of the cards. The number that is there represents the letter that goes with it. And anybody from who knew Renaissance magic, who had any contact with the principal theorists, which would include Trithemius, Paracelsus, Agrippa, all standing in the shadow of Ficino, you know, ripples coming out of these people into their different cultures. But the magic of Europe was firming up pretty nicely inside of what both clergy and lay people agreed was a body of correspondences that everybody was using that came with this Oriental inheritance at the close of the Crusades. So all this learning poured back in, the rich people pick it up, the church picks it up, but the church doesn't want the lay people to know it. And the rich are just as afraid of excommunication as the poor would be, because their thrones are built with the help of whatever relations they can have with Rome. So there's just a political minefield all over Europe, and all kinds of espionage and little sort of intelligence wars and cultural wars going on between the papacy, the royalty, and the intellectual laity, not including the peasants who never get to look at a book to begin with. But everybody played cards. Everybody played cards. So this is something that cut across all cultural layers. And really, this is my theory, and, I can't completely document it, but what it looks like to me is that we learn to do numbers by playing with cards. That the populace of Europe learned their numbers by playing with cards and set up the intellectual categories that then could have more information poured in. And this part is easy. The intellectual categories of the trumps, no matter what order you might find applying to a given deck. So in other words, in some region in Italy, they might have had their own trump order, or some little group in northern Germany, they might have had a slightly different association of what order the trumps came in. But in every case, you see them in 3 groups of 7. So the first 7 cards are always together, first 7 trumps, second 7 trumps are always together, third 7 trumps are always together. This is one of the oldest structures you find inside this trump order, that even among the competing game orders, they're called, there's always these 3 clusters. So this 7-based learning, and especially 7 plus 7 plus 7, that's the Hermetic cosmos from the ancient world, and which you find in the book that I wrote to support our tarot deck, the Tarot of the Holy Light. The trumps manifest themselves as 3 septenaries in the 3 worlds. So, first you have to put yourself together according to the first 7 trumps to become a human. You have to organize yourself as a septenary with the first 7 trumps. Then you move into the social world with the second 7 trumps. This is where you're learning to deal with other humans on the level playing field of the earth, and integrating yourself into your tribe and into your times and into your culture. And then when you graduate from that, the final 7 trumps, so that's the devil card all the way through to the world, that has to do with moving your consciousness to the vertical plane, where you are looking up towards heaven and dealing with the cosmic forces. So this is where the devil, the tower, which was originally called the lightning, the sun, the moon, the stars, the world, all these macrocosmic values. That's what you can get to if you've managed to cross the first 7 of personal individuation and the second 7 of social adaptation. Finally, the final trumps come and give you an opportunity to speak with God face to face, so to speak.
Wow. Thank you. Gosh, that was certainly some dialogue. That's amazing. I was interested, as we were discussing the cultural geography of tarot. I'm very interested, actually, about how the Arabs introduced tarot here to the West through the Crusades, and so on and so forth. But the point I wanted to remark on was this one about, you said that tarot just kind of manifested itself in some way without a manual and without any kind of antecedents. And it occurred to me as you were speaking that maybe that's a blessing, because in order for tarot to become what it has become today, as we were discussing earlier, then it kind of needed to go through all these different transformations without labels, in order for the archetypes to present themselves as they do, as a social and yet personal dynamic.
Well, the funny thing is, I would say yes and no, because the very identities of the trumps, which are given in their numbers and their names, those 22 have not changed, right? People might move their order around, or they might change the astrological attributions, they might fiddle one way or another, but the thing that actually makes it tarot, it's not the minor cards, because those were in the Mamluk pack, which, by the way, there's an excellent website. If you just Google MAMLUK, I think that you would get to a website that's very educational on the waves of tarot culture saturating from the east to the west, and how that entered into Europe. But anyway, the tarot trumps, the queens among the suited cards, and the trumps are the unique contribution of Europe to the Mamluk pack that turns it into tarot. So, as far as I'm concerned, tarot is a 78 card deck with 22 trumps, 16 royals, 40, pip cards or numbered suit cards, and the other decks are different things. This is my stance in order just to narrow down what I'm talking about, because otherwise, in the 20th century, all these different decks have piled in. And there's all kinds. I mean, there were foreshortened decks and different kinds of decks in the old days too, but I'm a theorist of tarot particularly, so I make that point. But this thing of why is it 22, you can, by just putting a stake down in the era of Marsilio Ficino and the Academy around the great Lorenzo, which is mid 1400s in Italy, you can take a sounding of the magical situation at that time and then go forward with other individuals, and you find there's a particular thing that the 22 means. Okay, so it's not arbitrary, it's not a surprise, it's actually a set of knowledge categories that have been held in a sacred manner through Hebrew culture and Arabic culture and every culture that has an alphabet. The alphabet is a 22-unit thing. And it has a history, and it comes with astrological and numerological attributions already long built in. So if you stood anywhere where educated people of the mid-1400s were gathering, and you talked about the 22, those educated people who were into magic would know exactly what you were saying. You were talking about these letters of any alphabet that you might want to pick, but they had magical alphabets as well as literal alphabets. They all represented the same values, because the alphabet is itself a cabinet of ideas, just the same way as we use the trumps. So see, now I've just separated two things out. I've said what makes the tarot unique is those trumps, and the thing that doesn't change is the titles to those trumps, or the reference, the things that those initial names that they were given refer to. Okay, so those archetypes have not changed one iota. However, how we picture them or what ideas we hang on them, those are cultural, because tarot appears in waves, and as each new wave comes in, the old wave slips under, and so to a new group of people it looks different in their mind. It has new clothes, it has new colors, it might have new ethnicity, but those 22 categories and their primary references are ancient from our classical education from the times before Christ. It was all set up already.
It's that's really, really very remarkable, and because I think the archetypes, certainly the 22 major archetypes, I kind of think that they came from the logos of the earth, that they represent the various life essences themselves, and I completely agree with you that as eras come and go, our perception of them changes culturally, because society shapes itself according to the epoch it's in. But I did want to pick up on a point, if I may, before we move on to talking about Tarot of the Holy Light. But in an earlier conversation we were having, you made several references to Masonry within Tarot. Now, I find this quite interesting, certainly within speculative Masonry, and how I certainly feel that the Rider-Waite deck, for example, embodies Masonic principles and thinking of possible rituals, but also this thing about continental Masonry, which certainly in the early 1900s was alive and well. And if I'm not mistaken, that Lady Frida Harris was a member of Continental Masonry, and I'm wondering how much of the Thoth deck as well may embody some of the Masonic thinking of the time. What do you think to that, Christine?
Well, this is where that crossing over from the late 1800s into the early 1900s is the point where the baton gets handed from the continental correspondences, the continental use of the Tarot, which again goes right straight back to the unambiguous, non-questioned Hebrew alphabet connections, A=1 and all the way down through the alphabet. And it gets handed over to the attention rolls to a group that comes roaring up with a different model, starting from 0, putting the A on the 0 and spelling the alphabet through the trumps completely differently than it's ever been before. And so at that point, this is where the continental design slips into the background of most people's minds. And people now, looking back on the 19th century, see this, what I see as a new model. They see it as the tradition. So yes, there's a lot of overlap. The people who formed the Waite deck were standing in the footprints of the Continentalists. Levi was the primary exponent of Continental Tarot at the time, and to get all of his works into English, it became the project of Waite and I think Westcott and Crowley to do the translations. So there we have primary exponent of Continental, the history of Tarot, the first 500 years, Eliphas Levi, being translated by the guys who are taking over from and shifting the model away from the French and continental European esoteric school. So see, the emphasis shifts from literally the continent to the islands. And the language that Tarot is spoken shifts from French and the other, especially Romance languages, to English. And at that point, certain things got shaved off. And that left a nice smooth surface for new features to be added. Okay? So, again, when I talk about the continental model of Tarot, I'm talking about everything coming from the Marseille model through what you were remarking about as being old school Masonry that was, petering out on the continent by the end of the 1800s, but still revered, still the literature, both the Masonic and the Rosicrucian inheritance, the alchemical inheritance was huge. Everybody was looking at it, no matter what their personal politics. And so much was borrowed from that in order to construct the 20th century decks. but they took certain things and changed them at a fundamental level that, to me, upsets the original order. Now, this is one of those weird things, because as the whole time I was growing up into my own practice, there was a split between the astrologers and the tarot readers, because the astrologers were saying we're doing science and the tarot readers were saying but we're doing intuition, and there was a constant argument about whose modality was better. Well, this is actually some of the difficulty between the continental model and the 20th century model, because self-avowedly the English guys who were taking over, were translating the works of Levi and bringing them over into English for their own purposes. They were saying, look, we're building this deck in the model of divinatory tarot. We're not trying to copy that classical stuff. We're doing this new thing that is divinatory and has its legacy in Atella and the Lenormand decks, and it's much more a matter of pulling things out of the surface of the card. We don't make you memorize all that old classical stuff. I mean, that's basically the pose that was taken. It's all too crazy back there anyway. We'll serve it to you in these pictures, which, remember, the Waite deck was the first illustrated deck in the 20th century. There were a few ancient decks that had extra pictures and more, even some with extra cards, but the Waite deck moved us all over to visualizing everything. And, as a psychic, we have to choose between whether we're going to read the energy of the person or whether we're going to read all the personality affect coming off of them because of the clothes they wear and their haircut and their, personal style and how they present themselves. I mean, and I'm not saying these things are competing, but they're dealt with at different levels, right? So you get your sociological information maybe from a surface, but if you're trying to get into the soul of the person, the essence of the person, you have to look way beyond that to the architecture of their incarnation. Kind of get away from all the bells and whistles on the surface, or you're just going to fall into the ego. Mm-hmm. So in the same way, tarot has these layers of depth. And in the 20th century, more of what was held in the background because the cards were so simple and sedate. Some of them exquisitely beautiful, but nothing like they are now. There were no pictures on the pips, for example, and everything. The same models got repeated over and over again without very much change at all for hundreds of years. So suddenly tarot is being visualized and everything's pulled up into color and motion and emotion and action, and you're seeing all this in the picture, and we no longer exercise those art of memory muscles that you used to always have. You used to have to learn what the numbers meant, what the suits meant, what were the references the royalty were making, what were the references the Trumps were making. You had to learn that and internalize it because, like I said, there was no manual. There was all kinds of information, but nobody said, put this on your tarot. Only the people who knew that would do that. Because if you said it in print and said it in public, you ran afoul of the Inquisition, and that went on for a number of centuries. So there couldn't be a manual, although you could look at Ficino's 3 books on life and see everything you need to know to load your deck up magically. Absolutely everything is there. And it's in Agrippa, and it's in Trithemius, and it's in, Giordano Bruno. They were all working from the same catalog of meanings, but you couldn't stand up and say it in public because you got in trouble. So only the person who had that kind of mind would interact with the cards that way, and everybody else would just play with them as game chips. So it was a perfect thing for being hidden in plain sight and for educating people's mind to think in orderly categories. I'll make this last remark and then I'll let you talk again. I'm sorry, I just go on.
No, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's a joy.
Well, the one thing that I was going to say is I don't see intuition as being in contrast to the sciences, because in the old days, you didn't expect that you were able to free associate until you had, as is said in Boethius, plowed your imagination and sown it with the seeds of the esoteric arts, and harvested a crop from those ideas so that you could actually have a living ecology inside of yourself. So instead of just juggling words, you're actually in those living realities because you have cultivated yourself to be engaged with those ideas. So the 22 letter numbers of the trumps, the personalities of these illustrated cards, which, remember, in at the end of the Dark Ages and rolling into the Renaissance, a pack of cards with faces on them is a pack of demons, because those things were originally, handmade, and a person who was an artist already had magical power because they were able to represent something that wasn't physically there. This is the basis of everybody's credulity in the face of the media, is that we believe things that are presented to us in print and in pictures. We have a neurological bias to believe that. Whatever we see, it's because the brain prioritizes the eyes so much. So we really have work to do to come away from our culture's projections so that we can be present with these ancient ideas in their own glory, in their own truth. And that involves some self-cultivation. So you asked me earlier about that remark I made, other people around me were taking Jesus as their personal savior. I took the 22 trumps. I literally said, I'm not going to make it through this crazy culture at this crazy time without some structure. So I'm going to learn what these things are about, and I'm going to organize my psyche so as to be able to talk this language with myself. Because I was very, very psychic and overwhelmed by it, and I absolutely needed discipline, and I couldn't be in therapy 24/7. So, this was my intellectual horizon for putting some kind of order on my wild and crazy inner experience. And I recommend it to everybody. It's a beautiful system. But it relies on the vocabulary of astrology, because astrology is the golden art and tarot is the silver. Tarot reflects what astrology projects.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. I think that given the fact that I had a predilection towards intuitive intelligence, working with tarot became a natural fit for me. And certainly the deck that I learnt my skills with was the Spanish version of the Marseille, which, as we know, it's not very pictorial. The pips are exactly that. They are pips. Mm-hmm. And you have to learn them in a different way, and you have to absorb the information. And I think that it does pushes, they do push rather, these inner buttons mm-hmm. where it really does develop your inner reality, mm-hmm. so that it becomes like this fusion between the two. But what's interested me, because when I teach my classes, we do use the Rider-Waite deck for various reasons, but from a sociological perspective, I find the Rider-Waite interesting because, as we know, it was produced in 1910 and so on and so forth. But there are so many changes in society since then. The classic being that women now have the vote, can choose whether or not to have children, and so on and so forth. And I find it really fascinating about how we project, as we've already discussed, sociological imprints onto the cards that perhaps didn't exist when they were first formulated.
Right. And I think it's kind of like all of archaeology. At the beginning, you just make guesses. You find things and you make guesses and you do the best you can. And then as you find more things and you make more associations, you can refine your guesses and you can look a little deeper and make some better associations. And eventually you build up a fairly sturdy idea of what was going on. I mean, if you're lucky and the archaeological vein is rich. So in terms of magical studies, which I just for some reason accidentally devoted my whole life to, um, I have just run into an incredibly rich vein. It's been massively educational and really helpful. And it again was a total accident or something more than accident that the tarot is the perfect magic cabinet for all the teachings of the ancient alchemical astrology upon which, you know, Kabbalah and Hermetic number theory and all these other things are built. So somehow the two sides came to me. I think I was probably 22 by the time I had astrology in one hand and tarot in the other. And they just drilled into the middle. You know, each of them came from their own direction and hooked up together in my corpus callosum and said, these will not come apart ever again. And I'm so grateful because it has provided me such a wonderful life and given me a lens to look at this changing world through. A very unchanging and beautiful lens. I call tarot the 78 faceted gem.
Indeed. And I'm always intrigued by actually how much tarot wants to share with us and teach us, how much it liberates our own inner teachers and wisdom, particularly concerning astrology, because little by little, as your consciousness develops around your tarot work, you automatically are drawn to what's going on in the hemispheres.
Oh yeah, well, and actually, when I was lucky enough to get an esoteric deck to begin with, the CC Zane deck from the Brotherhood of Light, and so it was always running tarot courses next to astrology courses, and you just had to learn them together. But I learned astrology by visualizing the cards on the charts because I find astrology to be unbearably compressed. I needed cartoons. I needed imagery to assist me so I could have conversations with them. So I learned astrology as the hand servant of tarot, even though most people come to it the other way around. But it doesn't matter because they really are like brother and sister. They speak each other's language. And, you know, nowadays all my students are taught to learn their cards in relation to their own birth chart and then watch the transits to see how current events are showing up in their readings. And this is basically why, in the end, I had to do the Tarot, the Holy Light, because every other deck out there is, to some degree or another, spun away from this older model that I'm trying to represent. So I went back to the 1600s and planted my flag with Jacob Boehm because he had the most exquisite statement, alchemical, astrological, Kabbalistic, theological, hermetic statement in Europe at the time. And this is before the occult paradigm starts to blossom into all these modern developments, before even the Kabbalah tree was stabilized. So I could really get back to fundamentals just right after Paracelsus in Northern Europe, where these guys were not Catholics and they weren't sold down the river to that worldview, demonically inspired worldview. And so they could really talk about this magical and yogic self-cultivation without fear, without the fear and loathing that had accompanied it in other cultures. So I really have enjoyed making this deck and the books that are going along with it. The book is out, Tarot, the Holy Light, a continental esoteric tarot. That's the book.
You've also got an iTunes app, I see, as well.
There's an iTunes app and there's a Kindle version. It's iTunes and Android, and then there's a Kindle version of the book. So everybody can find it wherever they want. We do sell the deck and the book from our home office, but they're also available through Amazon and iTunes, and etc.
It's a beautiful deck, Christine, and I love the imagery. Um, it reminds me of early alchemical imagery.
Totally.
Um,
Yes.
I just, I think this would be a great deck for both the person who's been on the tarot path for a long time and discovered the sciences, but I also feel it would be a great deck for those who are just coming into the ancient Hermetic laws, if you like,
We have
because
certainly found that. Yeah, we found that.
the imagery, it almost speaks to your inner landscape.
It comes from the inner landscape. These are
Yeah.
literally the images from the alchemists of the 16 across the 1600s, and they were talking a specific uh, language to each other that is this multidimensional, astral, kabbalistic, alchemical um, patois that they created. And so, Bohem was speaking to that, and we use quite a bit of art from the school of Bohem. So there's my husband, Michael Dowers, has been in the art world a long time, relating especially in his early years to comics, but developing his eye and developing his own sense of the energies. And when we got together, he picked up a couple of books off my bookshelves, and they were on these great collections of alchemical art. So he said, "What's this?" I said, "Aren't these great? To me, they look like tarot cards that jumped off the card and went crazy. You know, just got right into all kinds of shape shifting and polymorphous perversity. And just look what these guys are doing." And Michael took it off to his place, and the next thing I know, he started to produce these cards. So it took him about 4 years to collage them and then color them. So they were actually built on his computer, his big screen computer, and it was just a joy to watch. It was a wonderful process to witness him pulling these out, because he had all my writings and my favorite books and everything that I considered to be, true historical source material, but he was also really pulling it up from some deep places in himself. So there's a lot of, he took some risks that I think people don't, are afraid to do commercially these days, which is to actually reinterpret not only the ideas, but the imagery. So some of these cards I consider to be brilliant in a way that shocked me when I first saw them, because I wouldn't have embraced so fully the all the nuance he brought in. But again, he fell into the art of Jacob Boehm, whose followers were speaking this language of alchemy, and many of whom were draftsmen and engravers. And so there's just amazing stuff. And Michael's good taste and exquisite eye pulled these things up and assembled them, and almost never did I even have to lead him, much less correct him, because it just seemed like it was bullseye after bullseye. I certainly hope that our users feel the same way.
There's a wonderful account of what seems not only to be a very organic experience of putting a deck together, but also it seems to me to be a wonderful testimonial for you as a couple. And it must have been almost like a wonderful and rich dynamic to the relationship that you have.
Oh, indeed. Well, we got together in our 50s, so we're mid 60s now.
Oh,
And so these are our children. The deck, the first book. Now, the second book I'm making with another person, because it's time for Michael to do some other projects, but he created and designed and built the book that goes along with the deck, and his brother is the artist who did the cover of both the deck and the book. So it's a real homegrown project between the two of us, and some excellent and wonderfully supportive helpers who have made it possible for us to do this. So yes, this is our little family of creativity together. It's amazing. It's been an amazing time in my life.
and I'm sure that anyone who works with this deck is, I'd like to think that if I was to work with this deck, I would go through some alchemical processes that would be more conscious, because I have a feeling that this deck makes more conscious the underlying processes of alchemy.
I think so. I hope so. And the book that's going to come with it, the second book that we're still working on, called Foundations of the Esoteric Tradition, are going to address all of the historical decisions that we made in order to set the deck up the way it is, so that there's an accounting of these different arts and like the pyramid of the mysteries. What's the oldest, and the next oldest layer, and the next oldest layer, so we can climb that pyramid together and look at the whole landscape of Tarot, not just the Tarot, the Holy Light, but the whole historic landscape of Tarot from this elevated place where we understand the pieces and how they built together to form this wonderful tool that we have, that we love so much.
So we're nearly at the end of our conversation, sadly. I mean, there is so much that I would love to chat with you further about, Christine. It's been amazing. I mean, really speak to people in the States. So if you'd like to tell us again where we can find your website, how we can purchase the deck, so on and so forth, that would be great.
Oh, thank you, Avril. I've really enjoyed being here. You can go to the website www.tarotuniversity.com. So TAROT university.com, and that's the sales site for the book, and directly for the deck, and directly under it is the book. Then to see my monthly contributions, which I post every month at new moon, you can go to www.tarotark.letters. So that's TAROTARK letters, LETTERS.com. And that's my blog site where I do my monthly writing. So there's book reviews, there's reviews of the new moon chart, there's talk about what I'm doing and studies I'm interested in, and many, many articles. I've been writing there since 2005.
I have to say to our listeners that if you are looking for a worthy resource, then Tarot University is the place to go. It's amazing. There's something for everybody, and it's just such a rich resource. And I really thank you from the bottom of my heart, Christine, for coming on to UK Connection. You've inspired me. I feel boosted and spurred to carry on my tarot journey, and your students are very lucky to have you, I have to say.
Oh, thank you, my dear. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very grateful. This was a great opportunity.
Thank you, Christine. And I'd also like to say thank you to Miss Lucy Diamond, our producer, because if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be able to have these fab conversations. So thank you, Lucy, for creating the lovely platform that we have. And I would like to say good night, God bless. Thank you again to Christine, and thanks to Lucy, and thank you to our listeners. Good night, everyone. Good night.